Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone. Welcome to the All Paths podcast, where we support and celebrate all the different ways there are to grow your family. We're your hosts, Emily and Kate from the nonprofit organization All Paths Family Building, and today we're talking with one of our wonderful peer leaders, Jillian, about her journey. Jillian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into your story, we'd love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. So my name is Jillian. I am originally from Maryland, but I've been in Massachusetts now for a little over 10 years. Professionally speaking, my background is in nursing. I worked in primarily emergency and critical care. I am now, I'm spoiling this, but a stay-at-home mom. And I live in Central Mass with my husband and wild and wonderful 19-month-old and 3 dogs.
Oh my goodness.
It's
Busy
chaos.
house. It's a busy house, I'm sure.
That sounds wonderful.
Yes. Yeah, that actually sounds great. I want to come visit.
Just if you want to vacuum, feel free.
Oh, yes. Yeah, sure. Whatever. I believe you should come being ready to help and be put to work. Well, thank you for your years of working in nursing as well. It's an amazing profession and so important. So, about your own journey to grow your family, where did it all begin?
Yeah. So I feel like it was kind of similar to many people. My husband and I got married in September 2020, right in the midst of COVID. And I think this ties into my story, but unfortunately, 2 months after our wedding, my father-in-law unexpectedly passed away. And this kind of started this period of transition for us. We moved, I switched jobs, and kind of once the dust sort of settled a bit, we always knew we wanted to start a family, so we started trying. And we felt we were super lucky. We got pregnant for the first time in February 2021. And kind of everything we'd been through in the last couple months, it felt like the universe was finally being kind to us. So we were super excited, but I still had because I had a background in healthcare and I worked in the emergency room, I knew in the back of my mind that things can happen. Also, my mom had a history of multiple miscarriages, so I knew that. But still, I was super excited. So we told a few immediate family members, told my best friend, and took all the first bump pics like everyone wants to when they're excited. And a couple weeks later, I was at work and I started bleeding. And me being a nurse thought I was being super smart. And I called my OBGYN and I told them, thinking in my head, I was like, I don't want to go to the ER. I just want to go to my OB's office. And I was met with, nope, we can't squeeze you in. I was actually due to go in the next day for an ultrasound for dating my first one. And they said, nope, we're canceling that. You need to go to the ER. I was like, okay, this is what I'm getting handed. So went down to the ER and got some basic blood work done, had an ultrasound. And it was one of those moments where I was on the other side of things. And it's really difficult because with those bleeding in early pregnancy, it can certainly be a miscarriage, right? It could be the other big concerning thing that they send you to the ER for is it could be an ectopic pregnancy, which can be life-threatening. So that's the other big thing they want to rule out. But it's tough because you get met with, oh, it's so early. It just might be too early to see the baby on ultrasound. So that's kind of what I was told. They couldn't see anything. They did an HCG, so they saw my pregnancy levels. The other thing they do when you go in is they check your blood type. So if you're RH negative, you'll need ROGAM. So that way your body doesn't develop potentially antibodies. So we kind of went through that whole process and they discharged me home with the conclusion of, we don't know. My HCG was positive, nothing on ultrasound. It could just be too early. which I kind of knew was going to happen, but actually being the patient in that scenario, it's a terrible feeling. Like I knew unless the ultrasound tech was handing me ultrasound pictures and like everything looked great, that something was wrong. So I left the ER, called my OB, and they had me follow up with blood work 48 hours later to trend my quant, and it was trending down. So they followed me for a little bit, and I was in touch with like the nursing staff. And after like we knew it was a miscarriage, quant had hit zero, I called back and I wanted to make an appointment. And I'm talking to the receptionist at this point, and she was like, "An appointment for what?" And I was like, "Well, I just had a miscarriage. Like, it was my first pregnancy. Like, I want to talk to somebody about that." It was also a new OB practice that I was going to, so I hadn't actually met any of the doctors. And she was like, "Oh, no, no, you don't need to see a doctor. Like, you guys just try again." And I was like, "No, I get that. Like, believe me, I understand, but like, I want to meet with somebody because I had in the back of my head, especially with my mom's history, I was like, I feel like there might be more here. Like, I know how common this is, but like, this is still terrible. And I still want to like talk to a healthcare professional about this loss." Um, and I had to fight tooth and nail. Like, I was in tears with this receptionist on the phone. I feel like she finally just gave me an appointment because she felt bad. Um, and I will say, when I finally made it in, the OB I saw was incredibly compassionate and understanding, and essentially told me what I already knew, that like I was young and healthy and I should just try again to have a baby and we'd probably have better chance next time, right? So I took that information and started to move on. And I really, really struggled. Like, I didn't realize how much that loss was going to mentally affect me in so many ways, in my relationship, in like my interactions with other people. Like, I was in like a very, very dark place, but you carry on. So my husband and I continued on with life, and I actually decided to start grad school. That was my form of coping. So I started grad school, and then a couple months later, it was August, I had another positive pregnancy test, and definitely more guarded feelings this time. I had those switched OB practices, so I felt like slightly more hopeful that I was going to get better care. And unfortunately, that ended in a second loss at about 6 weeks. And at that point, I had made an appointment with this newer OB. We met, we discussed kind of like different things that could potentially be causing it. We did like a basic fertility panel. And I had in my head, I was like, well, there's just something wrong with me. Like maybe they can just give me like Clomid. Clomid fixes everything. It makes everyone have babies, right? Um, and she was like, they did all my blood work. No, everything looks perfect. So unexplained infertility was what I was met with. And once again, just told to keep on trying, which is so hard when you're in the midst of that because like at that point, like all I wanted was a baby. But like at the same time, the last thing I wanted was to see a positive pregnancy test because that no longer meant happiness and excitement. It was dread and terror at that point. But you keep going.
It's such a good point. Like, in a way, then the thing you want most is also the thing you fear most at the exact
Right.
same time. It's such a great point, and but it's so hard.
It's so hard. And I think at that point too, like we were in the phase of life where like we had just gotten married. All of our friends were getting married. It felt like all of our friends were having babies. And it felt like, and of course it's just so situational, but like it was like I can't tell you how many friends we know that like got married, went on their honeymoon, and had a honeymoon baby. And I was just like balled up in a corner sobbing and like I love them all, but hating their guts because I was like, why us? Like, like, what did I do in this lifetime to like deserve this? Like, why is it so easy for everybody else? So we continued and we had a third loss in December. And at that point, I called the OB practice. I was bleeding. I got met with oh, it could just be nothing. And I was like, I was actually at work on a 24-hour shift at the job I was working at the time. And it was like halfway through, like, there was no way. I stayed at work. I was like, I know what this is. This is awful. It sucks. But like, I'm not gonna pull somebody out of bed to come cover me, like when I know they're just gonna try my blood work and like nothing's going to come of this, sadly. So after that loss, I met with my OB and I actually really appreciated her. She kind of said to me, like, okay, so yep, this is a third loss. What I can do is either do like a more in-depth blood work panel, all the things, or we can refer you to a reproductive endocrinologist. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. Send me away. So I switched over to a reproductive endocrinologist. And actually, even that appointment was like so hard because during it, she said once again, and I hate this is probably my most hated phrase during all this time. Oh, you're young and healthy. Like, just keep trying. And I was like, I cannot just keep trying. Like, I am not okay. Like, I know so many people go through multiple losses, but like there has to be something. And she was like, okay, so what we can do is we can go ahead and kind of like fast track things and go straight to IVF because, I think it's like 50% of miscarriages can be caused by chromosomal abnormalities. So we'll do an egg retrieval, we'll do genetic testing, and we'll hopefully, create the best odds for you to have a successful pregnancy. And I was like, awesome, we're going to do that. Like in my mind, like being a nurse, like I'm like, here's a solution to our problem, right? I also did not realize how freaking long it was going to take to start that whole process. So we met with her in January. We, after fighting with insurance, which is another huge thing, I had no freaking clue how hard that was going to be, like pre-authorizations, and it was a disaster. Like the number of times that people got wrong fax numbers and like that was the reason we weren't starting our cycle, I was ready to lose my mind.
Can we talk about why are they even still faxing? Are they the only people faxing?
There was a time that I sat on the phone with insurance and I was like, I'm staying on, like, my fertility clinic said they were sending me this fax. I'm not leaving you until you tell me you have that. Like, it can't take that long. Like, this is like the last piece I need before we can start. Like, I'm depending on you. Like,
Yeah, so annoying.
and like, it's in that season of waiting. Like, it's so
Mhm.
annoying. So, insurance stuff finally happens. We start the IVF process, which another piece of things is that I have so much respect for people who go through the process of IVF and all the medications without a healthcare background, because it was intimidating for me as a nurse who's drawn up meds and given them like 1,000 times over. Like it's different doing it to yourself, but like still you're like reconstituting medication. I can't even imagine what that learning curve is like for like your average person. Like, so
It's
anyway, we start
terrifying.
it has to
You
be.
think you're going to screw stuff up constantly. And you're like, it's going to fail and
Yeah.
it's going to be all my fault because yeah, it's terrifying.
And your entire life is depending on it, like your future and like your hopeful children, like no pressure. So we start that whole process, and we ended up doing a retrieval in June. And then we waited for testing, and then we were able to do a transfer at the end of August. And again, like I thought I knew it wasn't a guarantee, but like I felt like it was a guarantee. Like we had a genetically perfect embryo, right? That was gonna be going into my young, healthy body that should have no problem sustaining a pregnancy. And we actually went away for my husband's birthday. And it was awful because this was the other piece. Like they did my quant, whatever, was it 10 days later? And it was super low, like not really a sustainable pregnancy, but it was still there. There was still a detectable level. So it's like that, like, well, maybe like it's gonna be the miracle. So you're like left on that, like you don't know what's gonna happen next, and you don't want to like completely disregard like a possibility, but like at the same time, like I was realistic. Like I didn't think we were I was like, no way, like it's not sticking. And the day after our overnight hotel stay, I started bleeding the next day and then got the phone call that our quant had hit 0. So transfer did not stick. And that was at that point September. And I was like, screw it. I was so done. I had done all the right things for the last, like during our IVF cycle, I like really honed in. I was like, whatever diet people told me to do, whatever Brazil nuts I needed to eat, I was doing the acupuncture, I was doing all the things. And like, we still didn't have like we still weren't pregnant. So September hit and I said, screw it. And I did everything I wanted to. I was like doing whatever workouts I wanted. I was definitely drinking more than I should have. I actually applied to acupuncture school in September. Like that's where we were at. I was kind of at this phase of like, maybe we're not going to have kids. Like what do I like what am I going to do with my life if that's our reality? So acupuncture school and like specifically treating fertility was like my game plan. Um, and lo and behold, end of September rolled around and I missed my cycle. And I was like looking at the calendar and I was like, that's weird. And then in my head, I was like, oh, well, I just did IVF. Like it's probably all the messed up hormones and everything. Like I'm sure that's what's causing this. So I took a pregnancy test and it was positive. And immediately I'm like, no, 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 no. Like there's something funky here. So I'm sobbing because that's what I do when I see those. And I call my fertility clinic right away. And I'm like heaving sobs on the phone and I'm trying to explain the situation. She's like, no, like this can't be hormonal. Like this isn't your IVF pregnancy that like miraculously stuck around. Like you guys spontaneously got pregnant. And I was like, no, like the crazy part, and like TMI, but like there was one day that could have happened. And ironically, it was right before we found out that our transfer failed. So I was still on all the meds to sustain like the IVF pregnancy. So maybe that's why this worked out. But she said, you're pregnant. We'll bring you in for blood work and we'll go from there. Um, And like I still, because of all of our losses, like I still wasn't like just elated and hopeful. I was still very guarded. So luckily we followed up with our clinic. Everything looked good. They trended my blood work for a while. They scheduled us for, I think we did an ultrasound at like 6 or 7 weeks. It was super early. And when we went to that ultrasound, I was fully prepared to be met with the blank screen. Um, and there was a baby, and that was the first time I'd like seen the baby and seen a heartbeat. And God bless that ultrasound tech, I bawled hysterically. My husband chatted with her the entire time, and I was just
Okay.
we were in the process of moving again. He was having an entire conversation about like
Oh,
restaurants that we should go to, and like have at it, honey. So yeah, I was pregnant. And ironically, because I had switched jobs again at this point, because of where I was at working, I had to go back to that original OB practice that I had with my first pregnancy that I couldn't stand with this pregnancy. And so I called, I made that first like OB appointment and I was dreading it. I was terrified to go back there. And wouldn't you know it? And they totally screwed me again. I show up for my first appointment with them and I like you talked to the nurse on the phone beforehand, right? Whatever. And then I go in for my first appointment. I was told it was meeting with the NP doctor and an ultrasound because it would be like their first ultrasound. I
Mhm.
go in and I was told, oh, you're not scheduled for an ultrasound today. Telling that to a person who's had recurrent pregnancy loss does not go over.
No, no, no.
So, yeah. So I'm like trying not to bawl my eyes out in the corner. And then I met with a nurse practitioner and I was like trying to explain those things to her. I was like, so I was told I was going to have an ultrasound and like I'm very glad that I'm seeing you, but like I kind of know how all this goes. And like I really need that ultrasound for like my peace of mind. Like I need to make sure that like there's a baby and the baby's okay. And I'll never forget, she said to me, she was like, well, this is really unfortunate for both of us. And I was like, it is it? Because her perspective was like it was gonna make the rest of our visit, it was gonna taint the rest of our visit. And I was like, you have to be kidding me. Like have a little compassion and understanding that this is me and my feelings. And like you're the healthcare professional. Like take yourself out of it. Like so many times throughout this entire journey, I've just been so shocked by healthcare and the way they approach patients who have dealt with loss and like the lack of insight and compassion that they bring forward. It's just wild. So I had my visit and they scheduled me for an ultrasound a week later. Then luckily we were moving again. So I had to switch OBs. And I will say, after I switched OBs, I had a very different and much better experience. And I would say to anyone, but especially anyone who's been through loss, like find an OB provider who is compassionate and understanding because they are out there. And I can't even tell you like the difference. It was incredible. And I love my OB now. Like
Oh, good.
he was so sweet, so understanding. Like he gave me his, like I have a cell phone number for him that I can like call or text, and he like must have my name saved because like he knows who it is when I'm reaching out to him. So God bless him.
That's great. I mean, when you were sharing
Yeah.
that story, I was just like, to me, I always love when I see that people have an OB or an RE that not just like lets them come in for an extra ultrasound or I mean, in that case, obviously you were anticipating an ultrasound and then
Yeah.
we're not getting one, which is even worse. But I think a lot of people, understandably so, particularly if they have a history of loss, they want maybe an extra, you know, Doppler or an extra ultrasound or both. And I just love when I hear that the reaction is yes, like, come on in here. We're here for
Yeah.
you. Like, whatever we can do to reassure you. And then obviously,
Yes.
conversely, I'm so sorry to hear that that was your
Yeah.
reaction, but couldn't agree more with you that like, if you have the opportunity to have a different provider and can find a different
Mm,
provider, I think it's so important to have your needs met
yes.
emotionally and physically.
Hmm. No, it's so true. And then as I kind of continued in the pregnancy, so I was pregnant, things were confirmed. I was like, I was, that's what I was waiting for this whole journey, right? Like, I just wanted to be pregnant. And I couldn't get over the fact that, like, I was still terrified. Like, and I found myself like, this is what I've always wanted. And like, I couldn't like connect. And almost didn't want to with like my baby because I was afraid that I was gonna lose the baby and how much more it was going to hurt. So, like, I did things like we didn't find out the gender right away. I was so anxious and not in a great headspace. And I was really surprised by that. And I felt really guilty about it too. Um, so I found good therapists throughout that whole journey, but I feel like it was during pregnancy that I really felt it was important that like I get into therapy and I realized that like clearly there's some stuff I need to work here, like a little bit more in depth. Like this didn't fix everything. Um, so I truly, throughout my entire pregnancy, I was so anxious, and like each milestone made things like a little bit easier. Like making it through the anatomy scan was like a big deep breath. Making it to like the week of viability, it was like, okay, another step. We actually didn't like publicly announce our pregnancy until viability. It was like 26 weeks. So I was just so afraid to share that news and then have to go back and tell people that we went through a loss. Because prior to all of that, we had been very private with all of our losses. Like few friends and family knew, but we really hadn't like publicly like acknowledged any of it. And actually, when we did our pregnancy announcement, I kind of like snuck in a little tidbit of like, it's been a journey for us because I wanted people to understand like how big this was for us, because it wasn't just your average pregnancy announcement. It didn't feel like that. It was huge. Like it was shocking and amazing that we made it this far. And I wanted people to like understand the gravity of that. So went through pregnancy, and luckily physically like things were very smooth, but emotionally they were really, really tough. Um, and then we got to labor and delivery, and like each step I was like, something terrible is going to happen in labor and delivery. Like I'm going to die, my baby's going to have something terrible happen. Like I feel like when you're in that headspace, like you just like find those stories and they are out there. And I was just like, no, like something bad. And it wasn't until like Teddy was delivered, he was placed on my chest, and he was crying and like breathing, and I was like, oh my God, like he's really here. Like I actually have like a baby, and like he's okay and I'm still alive, and like we did this. Like it was such a moment of like euphoria and also terror. The other thing that stuck out to me when it comes to like loss and having a baby after everything we went through is I'm somebody who does not love the newborn phase, admittedly. And I really struggled postpartum. And I felt like because of what we had gone through, I wasn't allowed to complain. And I find that
Yes.
theme a lot in this community. Like it took a lot for me to ask for help, and I didn't a lot of times. And that is something I regret in that postpartum period. So,
Yeah.
and it's okay for us to need help.
No, that's so relatable.
So,
100%. I mean, Emily and I think I mean, I not think, I know we are so with you on that. And it's one of our
yeah.
biggest passions, I think, is that whole continuum of the emotional and mental health part of this is that preconception and going through loss and going through infertility and then going through pregnancy and then going through the postpartum period and all throughout parenting. No
Mm,
matter what your journey has been, your mental health needs are so valid. They're so important. We're so hard on ourselves and think
mm,
that we have to feel like only joy and gratitude at all times. It's like, what? No. And
yeah.
I mean, I believe that for all parents, but parents who have struggled, I think, put this added pressure on themselves to appreciate and like, of course you do. Again, it's like
Mm,
all about the and. Yes, you appreciate like so deeply that you can't even describe it in words. And it is extremely difficult to have a newborn and
yeah.
to be a parent. So, oh
Hmm.
my God,
Yeah.
we are so with you.
Yeah. I
And I
think that I go back to the quote of like two things can be true. And I feel like it took me a really, really long time to like actually accept that, but it is so true in so many areas of every part of life. But I feel like especially this journey.
Yeah.
mm, and there can be that weird survivor's guilt too. That
Mm,
especially if you really tapped into a community when
yep.
you were going through the challenging bits of becoming pregnant or staying pregnant, or the pregnancy after infertility and loss in and of itself. If when you move on to that next chapter in your story, you can feel such guilt, thinking about all the folks that are still you know in the earlier
Right.
stages of theirs.
And I feel like I even felt specific guilt because it was a spontaneous pregnancy. It wasn't an IVF pregnancy, and I almost felt bad about that. Because I had like delved into like the community a little bit, felt like I was like a part of it, and then I was like, oh, but I'm not. But it didn't go away. Like the losses and all of that we went through, like it's still a part of like who I am and like my story. So,
Mhm. I totally hear that. Like you're almost like, oh, we ended up getting pregnant without IVF and you almost like apologize for it. But my thing is like, if someone that you connected with is upset about that, like they're not your people, like if
mm,
they're, of course they might feel some emotions about it, but like if it makes them judge you differently, like they're not the person you need in terms of the support you need and the community you need.
Yeah. So speaking of kind of support and community, were
mm.
there any particular people or groups that you found helpful when you were going through your journey?
So I wish I had done more in terms of support for myself. I found an individual therapist, and we told like a very small group of like family and friends. My one best friend like knew all the things and stuck with me through it, but she didn't have any of the fertility issues. She was wonderful, but she never like 100% understood, and she tried her best and she like did her own research. Um, but I like now looking back, like, I so wish I'd found something like All Paths beforehand, because I can't even imagine how helpful it would have been to like truly talk to people who are in it, the same things you're going through during that time period. Because I really did feel to a greater degree like incredibly isolated and alone. I felt like as far as I knew, I was the only person like in our circle that really had dealt with anything.
Can you talk a little bit about how you became a peer leader? Is that related to
Sure.
that feeling of
Yeah.
isolation when you were going through everything, or was there another motivation for that?
Yeah, so I kind of after I went through my pregnancy with Teddy, and I now being a stay-at-home mom, I had kind of a little bit of time. I kind of started to reflect on like everything I'd been through and like what did I want to kind of do with my life? And I kept coming back to like there has to be like I want to support women who are going through this. Like I want to be there for people who went through what I went through and like be that support that like I didn't have that I so wish I had. So I started browsing and I found All Pass and I did some deep digging and I was looking at all the resources and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like why didn't I find this years ago? Like I so wish I knew. Like little things like like you guys have the insurance consult piece. I was like, oh my, I tell everybody about it because I'm like, it's so
Oh, good.
hard. It's so
Yeah.
hard to like navigate all that on your own. So I wanted to help. And I feel like being a nurse and just like who I am in general, I feel like I've always been like decent at like holding space for people. So I reached out to Emily and I initially said I wanted to just substitute. I wanted to dip my toe in the water, and then magically a position opened for the primary pregnancy loss. And I was like, oh, I'll just go for it. And it has been amazing. And I am so, so grateful for the opportunity. I can't say enough about the support groups. They truly are such an amazing space for people who are struggling. And uh, I think everyone should go to them.
Well, we agree, and also we appreciate you. Thank you so much for being part of our family of support group leaders, because honestly, obviously, we can't do it without the amazing volunteers who lead these groups, and it's so amazing. So thank you so much. And for people that maybe have never been to one, can you just tell us just a little bit about from your perspective, like what are the groups like? Like if you could talk to yourself a few years ago, what would you say to try to reassure you that this
Yeah.
is something you should do?
So the groups are peer led, obviously. So kind of what we start off with is a general overview. We have some group rules, keep things confidential. And then from that point, it's really just I feel like a group of people who have similar experiences, who are able to chat and talk about the difficult things that are going on in their life and find people who truly can relate to those same struggles. And honestly, I feel like I am a small part of the magic that happens in a peer group. I feel like the connections that are made between other group members are truly like the foundation of like the magic of what happens. You guys have the motto of like find your people, and I love seeing like it's so unfortunate that people need to reach out to these groups, right? But like the connections that are made, like actually the group I lead, we have kind of the same small group of people that attend pretty much every month. And I think almost all of them have connected outside of our support group at this point. So it's an amazing space. And it's just so nice to be in a space where people just get it.
Hmm. Yeah. It's so huge. I mean,
Mhm.
I think it's so important. Well, thank you, because I think sometimes, people might hear the term support group and think like, oh, I don't need that. Like I don't know what they're picturing, but it's
Mm,
like, I don't, but I just feel like they are so relaxed in a way and
mm,
so kind of comfortable. And with being virtual, I think sometimes that's really convenient for people that you can be cozy at home and do it on your computer or your phone and
right.
just be in your own space, but at the same time make these really meaningful connections with the other participants. And like you said, that's where the magic happens. And you get to
Yeah.
see it firsthand as the leader, which is really
Mhm.
nice to see those little um, connections forming between them. It's great. So, and we love hearing about them. Well, so we wrap up our episodes with a couple questions that we ask everyone. So we're gonna ask it of you. So one is that what is one thing you would say to someone just starting to grow their family? And sort of the other side of that is what's one thing you wish people would never say to people who are struggling to build their family?
I think what I would say to someone who is first starting to try to grow their family and encountering any kind of barriers, is to find a really good therapist. I truly think that everyone should be in therapy, and I I feel like I waited a little too long in my journey to find one. And it's something that also comes up a lot in support groups of like, I'm in this like dark spot. Like, I feel like I should find someone, and it's kind of harder to do at that point. So, my vote is therapy early on.
So true. Great advice.
Yeah. Mm. And in terms of things people shouldn't say, I feel like anything that is like that toxic positivity is what kills me. Um, Especially with like the loss. Like I feel like I mentioned it a couple of times, but like, oh, but you're young and healthy. Like that doesn't lessen the feelings that I have because I lost pregnancy. And I feel like there's like so many little anecdotes that you can throw in there, but just like greeting grief with like support rather than flipping the switch and trying to make it positive because people just want to be supported in their feelings. They don't want to be told that everything's going to be okay because everything might not be okay um, at the end of the day. So
Wow. Amen.
I
Amen,
feel like,
sister.
yeah, if we could just wipe out toxic positivity, that'd be great.
Yep.
Again, we are 100% with you. And I was really struck when you were sharing your story too, that I think in healthcare and just in life, we shouldn't assume anything about what people are going through emotionally. Someone's first loss, no matter what stage of pregnancy it was at, can be devastating. As you said,
Mhm.
it really, really threw you for a loop. And that was just, which again, I hate, your first loss. But,
Mhm.
and you were at least so aware enough to ask for help, to say, I'm struggling with this. And you still were getting dismissed because people are like, you're young, you're healthy. It's just your first loss. It was early. And it's like, I
Mhm.
haven't found that it's easy for anyone, but some people they just kind of like move forward. They're the type that are like, on to the next one and like put it in their rearview mirror. Maybe not the
Yeah.
healthiest thing, you know, but we shouldn't
Yeah.
assume that people are going to struggle with it, nor should we assume that they're not. And I
Right.
mean, we've had fertility clinics tell us that like they only suggest our support groups if like the person is crying during one of their appointments. And I always say to them, sometimes the person crying is more emotionally healthy actually than like I felt like
Mhm.
sometimes I was just this robot of emotional numbness, like that was like,
Mhm.
I'm fine, while like my insides were so tied in knots. So I'm like, please share our support groups with everyone in your practice because you never know who needs us. You can't tell by
Mhm.
talking to them. You can't tell by looking at them. Just tell them all about it, So that's just one example, but I was really struck by
Mhm.
that when you were talking about that.
Yeah.
So,
No, I think that's so true.
well, thank you so much. I mean, as you can tell, we So appreciate you being a group leader for us and really appreciate having you as a guest on our podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
We hope you'll join us next time for more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. And follow us on social media at allpathsfb or visit our website, allpathsfb.org, for more information about our work. All Paths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support who are vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone struggling to grow their families. Today, we want to give a special shout out to our platinum sponsor, EMD Serono. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please help spread the word so that anyone struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. It's an honor to walk with you on your family building journey. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. It's an honor to walk with you on your family building journey.